Welcome to my channel, Delightful Stories. I'll be happy if you subscribe to my channel and like it. Enjoy watching and don't forget to leave your opinion in the comments about the story. Anne walked from the bus stop to the house. It was the beginning of spring and it was getting noticeably darker. Only a week or two ago, it had been a dull night, but now it was only a light lilac twilight. 2 grocery bags were in the woman's hands. There was bread, a good piece of meat which could be used to make soup and goulash, and of course, various delicacies. What could they be without? Today, I was given an advance. Tomorrow is a day off, which means that Anne and her daughter will have a traditional Friday night movie night. Alice had already chosen some kind of comedy in advance. Anne smiled. Only her daughter made a woman's life happy, full, and meaningful. 8-year-old Alice went to school near her home. She was an excellent student, though her mother never taught her lessons, only helped her sometimes with extra projects. Nothing more. The woman would like to spend more time with her child, but she has to work very, very hard to provide for herself and her daughter, but her daughter is doing just fine on her own. She is responsible, smart, serious, and very independent. She goes to school by herself because by the time Alice leaves home, her mother is already on the bus, halfway to work, and she returns to her empty apartment after school, cleans, eats lunch, sits down to study, sets the alarm on her phone to start getting ready in time for practice. Alice is in the basketball section at her school. The coach says the little girl has an iron character and great prospects in this sport. What a miracle, baby! Anne smiled at the thought of her little girl. Yes, she was incredibly lucky to have her. And yet the woman looked with pain in her heart at the children who were accompanied everywhere by caring adults, loving grandmothers, grandfathers, mothers, housewives, fathers. These girls and boys have more time to play. They are cared for and nurtured. Adults make the little ones' lives happier, brighter, and safer. Yes, at first she was very disturbed by the thought of her little girl with a huge backpack over her shoulders, walking everywhere and everywhere alone. Colleagues at work wondered, "Aren't you afraid the bad man will steal her away? What if a dog attacks her? What if she gets lost?" And only sighed. Of course, all these fears were present. There was no getting away from them. Only Alice, the woman was sure, would not go anywhere with a stranger, would bypass a pack of dogs and certainly find her way home. She is surprisingly mature for her age, attentive, sensitive, intelligent, and Anne has no other way out. She cannot afford to sit with a child, and even change her job to one that is closer to home too cannot. Because the brick factory where the woman works as an economist pays well. What it took for her to get a job here. Her salary now exceeds the city average. The single mother and her daughter do not live in luxury, but they have enough money for clothes, rent, food, and even entertainment. If Anne gets less, they simply will not survive. And then Svetlana Alexeyevna will be able to do what she has been dreaming of for so long. Remembering her former mother-in-law, Anne shrugged her shoulders sultrily. Scary person, and yet she once seemed so sweet, so open, so friendly. When Sergio had brought an already pregnant Anne to meet her parents years ago, the girl had been very worried. She was well aware of how their situation looked from the outside. A poor girl from the countryside seduced a guy from a wealthy family, fooled the young man with his weaknesses. She got him pregnant on purpose, and now he just has to marry her as an honest and noble man. In fact, it was, of course, all wrong. But even the girl's classmates, who knew her very well, made such assumptions. You're good. The red-haired girl sincerely praised her when she heard the news. You look so quiet, so right, and yet you've arranged your life. In a way we never dreamed of. Now you'll live and do not deny yourself anything. That's a great plan, by the way. I should try that too. Why? I also want to be a rich husband's wife. They were really happy for their friend who, as it seemed to them, had pulled off a risky scheme and came out a winner. She received an offer from a prominent fiancé. I guess after her friend's reactions, the girl realized that everyone else thought exactly the same, and so did Sergio's parents. They, of course, would look upon her as the enemy. Well, of course. A country girl came to the city and decided to get a foothold here with a successful marriage. Sergio was indeed from a very wealthy family, but she did not find that out at once. The guy dressed in simple jeans, t-shirts, preferred comfortable sneakers to expensive shoes. Yes, it turned out that the watch on his hand and his cell phone were expensive. An experienced eye would have appreciated it at once. But how was a country girl to know about the cost of accessories? A watch like a watch, a phone like a phone. He usually came to the university on a motorcycle. A lot of guys showed up in expensive cars. That's where you could tell there was wealth in their families. But here was a motorcycle, and always thought that bikes didn't cost that much. Everyone could afford them. Sergio also had a part-time job with a big real estate firm. He worked in a not particularly skilled position as a courier or something like that. That's why the girl was not surprised that he had a motorcycle. He probably saved it up from his salary or took out a loan. At the beginning of the relationship, Sergio did not tell her that the company where he worked belonged to his father. The girl could not imagine that his parents were so successful and wealthy. The girl watched him for a long time from a distance. They studied at different faculties. The guy was a student of a prestigious financial and economic field, and also really wanted to go there after school. She prepared a lot, sat for days and nights over textbooks, but it did not work out. She did not get into that department. The poor country girl wanted to escape poverty. She had wonderful parents, kind, understanding, supportive, but she did not want to repeat their fate. They lived in a small house without running water. A modest washstand hung on the wall in a closet, and she had to wash there. The toilet was outside. There was also a bathhouse in the yard, but it was only heated on weekends. My parents worked hard and the family did not have enough money. It was just like everyone else. Other families lived exactly the same. There were just not enough jobs in their village, and the salaries were tiny. People survived by doing hard labor. Only the girl did not want such a fate for herself. Her parents supported their daughter in her desire to get an education and stay in the city. They even tried not to overburden her with housework. They wanted the girl to devote all her time to her studies. "Study, my daughter," her mother admonished her. Anne was indeed the best in her class. Studying was easy for her. She perceived the entrance exams to the institute as an important event, which would be a turning point in the fight for a happy life, and the girl withstood this battle with dignity. At the end of the exam, she scored a lot of points. The result pleasantly surprised the applicant herself, but still these points were not enough to enter the publicly funded department of the Faculty of Finance and Economics. The girl then experienced disappointment mixed with surprise. How so? In her school, she was on her head better than the others. Why suddenly so many people bypassed her? Later, the girl learned about tutors, preparing applicants for the test questions and gifts that parents of future students brought to the dean's office. Anne blamed herself for not being well enough prepared for admission to the university. She lacked just a few points. At the same time, she was easily accepted into the for-profit department. Well, you'll study for a year or two on a paying basis, and then someone will probably get expelled, and you'll go on a budget. That was the consolation of an unfamiliar female undergraduate student. She couldn't get past the results stand. That's what a lot of people do. You're just a little short on points. So the brains are present. Students like that are loved and promoted. She only shook her head. This girl couldn't understand that for her family, and a year's tuition was an impossible burden to bear. Anne had already decided that a year was lost, that she would have to return to the village and prepare for admission again. This time, more seriously. Only this, and this is not a guarantee that the girl's dream will come true the next year. But the same senior met on her way, suggested a completely different way out. Why do you need this finance and economics thing? She shrugged. It's mostly just the kids of rich parents studying here. The education, exactly the same, in fact, is given in the Department of Economics. It's even better, there's less pathos. How grateful she was to her lucky rescuer. Later, she tried to find this girl to talk to her, to thank her. No luck. It turned out that she had enough points for another faculty, even with more than enough. That's how she became a student. As a country girl, she was given a dormitory and a social scholarship. She could not believe her happiness for a long time yet. The girl studied diligently. She attended all the lectures, handed in her term papers on time, always did her homework, and her professors praised her and set an example for others. That even made her feel a little uncomfortable. The girl gave all her time and energy to her studies. True, she had to work 2 or 3 extra hours in the evening as a salesperson at a bakery nearby the dormitory. The scholarship was not enough to live on, and parents with all desire could not help their daughter. So she did the best she could. Naturally, she had no time for clubs, discos, and student parties. Sometimes it made her a little sad. But every time she reminded herself of her goal, everything immediately fell into place. Her classmates and friends often excitedly told her about the weekend wildly spent, shared the details of romantic adventures, vividly described their admirers. At such moments, the girl also dreamed of having a decent young man near her, loving, caring, funny, handsome, and, of course, one in which she could fall head over heels in love. But the guys who came into the girl's field of vision did not qualify for the role of prince. No, many of them were handsome and fun. But these young men seemed too well to do, too unserious, too selfish. None of them she could tie her fate to. Friends jokingly called her a bore, and when she refused to go with them to the next party, frightened that she would meet old age alone, surrounded by 10 cats. And then, in the 4th year, the girl finally saw a guy who did not leave her indifferent. How had she not noticed him before? Strange. A young man dashing into the parking lot on a black motorcycle. He wore jeans and a black t-shirt. He wore a helmet. He looked like a prince out riding in the countryside. She watched from a distance as the motorcyclist took off his helmet. For some reason, the girl longed to see his eyes. I wish she hadn't done that, because when Sergio, as if sensing the look, looked in Anne's direction, the girl realized that gone, the piercing turquoise eyes on his tanned face, the snow-white smile, the thick hair of some incredibly pleasant shade of wheat. She could have admired this guy indefinitely, if she had not had to observe the norms of decency. She suddenly felt uncomfortable, standing there, staring at a stranger. What would he think of her anyway? She turned abruptly and hurried toward the building that housed the library. The boy caught up with her. He caught up with her, catching her gently by the arm, just inside the door. She turned around and flashed a glare that met his slightly mocking gaze. The stranger was smiling at her warmly, openly, and sincerely. She had never felt such feelings before. It was hard to describe in words. Goosebumps ran down her back and neck in droves. Warmth poured over her body, and her heart pounded like a wind. That day the couple's romance began, beautiful at first, like a magical fairy tale. But it ended rather like a bad horror movie. Sergio confessed that he had felt the girl's eyes, and from her eyes he understood that it was with her that he could be happy. It was only later in analyzing the situation that she realized that the guy at the time had simply been satiated with beautiful girls from wealthy families. They were all spoiled, selfish princesses who could not be surprised or happy about anything. And here was a simple, unsophisticated girl from the village, very pretty. Besides, she looked at him with amorous eyes, caught his every word, and admired everything he did or said. She delighted in such small things as a banal bouquet of roses. She was struck by the luxury of the furnishings of restaurants. He was interested in observing the behavior and emotions of an unspoiled girl. He was a man who was revealing to a poor student a whole new world to her. It turned his head and gave him faith in his own power and uniqueness. Of course, he also developed some feelings for the girl for whom he was everything, otherwise impossible. But the boy was never going to make her the center of his own universe. True, she realized all that later, when the problems began. At first it seemed to her that he was doing one deed after another for her. The guy was spending money on his girlfriend. Anne was embarrassed by this. She even tried to refuse it at first. She knew better than anyone that money did not just come in handy. Sergio worked as a courier and made money, but that did not mean he had to spend it all on her. He just smiled at her every objection and gave her the next luxurious gift. Their relationship was like a romantic comedy or a beautiful melodrama. Sergio was so sweet, so considerate. He was incredibly handsome and always knew how to cheer her up. Anne still spent a lot of time studying, but now lectures and seminars did not constitute her whole life. Surprisingly, there was enough time for everything and for dates with her lover and for notebooks. It was a wonderfully unforgettable couple. They had been dating for about a year by the time the girl realized with horror that she was expecting a baby. At first she couldn't believe it was happening because they were so cautious. But one test after another consistently produced 2 bright stripes, so she had to accept the fact. The girl came to her despair. Soon her diploma defense, credits, and exams would be the finish line. She'd been going for so long. Okay, maybe the pregnancy itself wouldn't stop her from preparing for the final tests of her diploma. She'll write her exams and pass her credits. But by the end of her 5th year, she'll have a huge belly. Who would hire her? She'd have to stay home and take care of the baby. And then what were those 5 years of study for? Will the guy be happy about this news? Would he take responsibility for her and the baby? Their relationship was kind of lofty, trusting. But it was one thing to have a beautiful romance, and another thing to be a burden in the form of a pregnant woman. The girl wept about. She was desperate, resentful, fearful for the future. And then she calmed down and decided to tell the man on whom her fate depended. Sergio took the news of the pregnancy with unexpected joy for him. It was still a game. He was as excited as a child for a new toy. Except that she hadn't noticed it at the time. So happy that the man she loved didn't see the pregnancy as a problem. "What are we going to do now?" she asked the girl, looking at the boy. "Let's get married, of course." He smiled and put his arm around her shoulders. "We'll get married and graduate. Then I'll go to work and you're on maternity leave. And where will we live?" She was very worried about that question. She would soon be kicked out of the dormitory, and she would probably have to move into her boyfriend's apartment and live with her husband's relatives. She would probably have to get used to each other, get accustomed to each other. "We'll live in my apartment," the boy shrugged. "My dad gave it to me a long time ago. It's big and spacious. You'd like it. I'd have moved in a long time ago, but my mother said I could only do that when I got married. That's the condition she made. So now I'm getting married. Do you have an apartment?" The girl still couldn't believe what she had just heard. "Who are your parents?" She did not know much about Sergio's family, who preferred to change the subject whenever she talked about it. There wasn't much to tell about them. He grimaced. "Ordinary. Mother's a housewife. Took care of me and my brothers all my life. She had three of us. She had three of us, remember what I told you? Anne nodded. Sergio had indeed mentioned that he had two older brothers. Well, the boy continued, the mother takes care of the house, and the father runs his own business. He's got a real estate agency, didn't I tell you? No. Anne shook her head. Sergio never told me that his own father owned the firm where he worked as a courier. Well, now I'm telling you, so don't worry. We'll definitely have a place to live. By the way, you should introduce you to your parents. Now my mother will be happy. She thinks I have the wind in my head. She's always making an example of my older brothers. Now she'll know that I'm responsible too. She was terrified of meeting Sergio's parents. He was sure his mother and father would like her. The girl herself had her doubts. Of course, no one would believe that she had no idea how rich the groom was. Vaughn, even her friends, think that she got pregnant by a rich man on purpose, so that she could join the family. But acquaintance was more than successful, despite the fact that the girl was at first confused in the luxurious interiors of the mansion where the guy lived with his parents. A round table was laid out in the living room. Everything looked appetizing and attractive, but she could not get a bite in her throat from the excitement. The parents introduced themselves. Her mother-in-law, to be smiled at their guests openly. She had the same piercingly turquoise eyes as her son. The girl was amazed at the way her beloved's mother looked. This woman was much older than her own mother, but she did not notice any wrinkles on Jane's face. A slender, trim figure, flawless skin, a stylish, elegant dress. The groom's father didn't look his age either. Fit, energetic. From a social perspective, his parents, in spite of all their wealth, were pleasant and simple people. After hearing the girl's story, Jane was delighted. "What a clever girl you are," she praised the girl. "You have already achieved a lot by your own work. Amazing determination. I need people like that." Gregory stepped in. "After the maternity leave, I'll take you in, so don't worry about the job." She could not believe her happiness at the time. Everything that was going on seemed like a beautiful fairy tale. The parents of the groom not only did not express their displeasure with the poor pregnant daughter-in-law, but on the contrary were genuinely happy for her. That's exactly the kind of girl you need around. Shook her head Jane, smiling. "Why say irresponsible? Serious, hard-working. What happiness that you have met." And then did not understand why my parents called my son irresponsible. He seems to be quite a serious and conscientious young man, too. But of course, he sometimes rides a motorcycle dangerously, not without that, and spends a lot of time with friends. But he's still young and carefree. It's natural that he wants to have fun. When else to do it, as not in his youth? The groom's parents arranged a lavish wedding for the young couple. The bride was embarrassed that they had taken care of all the expenses. Her parents were also very embarrassed. But Jane acted so simply and naturally that the tension gradually evaporated somewhere. She spoke very kindly and respectfully to her mother and father, and even thanked them for raising such a beautiful daughter. She smiled warmly at her daughter-in-law and showered her with compliments. She really looked like a real princess in the dress her mother-in-law had helped her choose and paid for. The bride wore such an outfit and held herself accordingly. Sergio was proud that his young wife was such a beauty. He did not let her hand out of his palm for the first half of the wedding. But then, when the official part was over, he ran off to his friends as usual. The bride at the time was happy for her newly minted husband. She liked that he was so sociable and cheerful. Family life also resembled a fairy tale at first. The girl now lived in a huge, stylish apartment. Previously, she had only seen such interiors in fashion magazines. It took her a long time to get used to the fact that she was the rightful owner of all this splendor. She now had her own card, to which twice a month a large sum magically fell. Her husband transferred money to his wife for the household. Accustomed to saving money, at first she didn't even have time to spend it. It was so wonderful so unaccustomed, to come to the store and throw into the cart all the things she liked instead of looking for products on sale. Her relationship with her husband's parents was great. She considered them to be her own people already. Jane often invited her daughter-in-law to visit. They talked a lot. Anne talked about her life, and her mother-in-law about hers. It turned out that Jane was also born and grew up in the country. And then her family moved to the city where, at that time, a very young girl, and met Gregory, her future husband, and the father of their 3 sons. He was still a simple accountant at the factory then, the woman recalled from the past. It was later he opened his own business. I helped him, supported him in every way I could. So it was our common offspring. Mother-in-law often said that all her life she dreamed of a daughter. She wanted a daughter so much. And all we had were boys. And the youngest one, your husband, was born only because I hoped for a girl. My last try, and here he is a boy again. And oddly enough, he is the favorite of the 3 of us. Although at first, of course, I was very disappointed. I was sure I was carrying a daughter this time. Her 2 oldest sons had given her a total of 4 grandchildren. So even here the woman didn't get to babysit a girl. I dream of buying my granddaughter dolls, braiding her plaits, choosing pretty dresses with her, to do what I wanted to do with my daughter. And then there are the boys again, the railroads and constructors, the cars. No, I love them, of course, but so want something nice, girlish pink. You're the only hope now. Before this revelation from her mother-in-law, the girl didn't care what gender her baby was. But after that, the girl suddenly realized that she also really wanted a daughter, a little girl with turquoise, like her father's eyes, and long, beautiful hair. It's really wonderful. To plait pigtails, tie bows, dress the baby in pink dresses. Her husband, on the contrary, dreamed of a son. So he said, though his wife increasingly began to think that he didn't care about the baby at all. He spent a lot of time at work in the evenings, and on weekends he would run off to friends. It was so unlike the beginning of their relationship. The wife hoped that when the baby was born, the young spouse would settle down, but she was wrong. Things got worse. Alice was born on time, and when that tiny red creature was placed on her chest, the girl realized, from that moment on, her life was divided into her life, was divided into her life, before and after. Now she was a mother. His parents threw a lavish discharge party. There was everything. An animator in a bear suit, pink and white balloons, flowers, happy relatives, and of course a cameraman with a camera who captured every moment of the holiday. Jane reverently accepted a pink balloon in her hand. Finally, her mother-in-law's long-held dream had come true. She now had a granddaughter, long-awaited and beloved. The father, of course, also seemed to be happy and even posed with pleasure in front of the photographer with his daughter in his arms. But the young mother immediately noticed that he was bored with all this. There was no sincere joy in the eyes of the young father. She did not notice even a glimmer of the excitement and admiration that she herself, or even her mother-in-law, felt. The family routine flowed on. Anne plunged completely into the care of her daughter. Mother-in-law often visited the young mother, and her newborn baby girl taught her daughter-in-law how to take care of the baby because she was a mother for the first time and did not know how to do anything. However, the science was not so clever. Very soon, the mother felt quite confident, but her mother-in-law kept coming, and the girl did not mind. She could see how happy the woman was about her long-awaited granddaughter. After all, it's wonderful to have a child loved by someone other than her parents, especially since her husband wasn't really interested in Alice. His daughter rather annoyed him. He wrinkled his nose when the girl suddenly began to cry, especially after bedtime, and lamented the sleepless nights. He didn't get up to the baby's crying. It was always her mother who rushed to the baby. These nightly performances interfered with the full sleep of the head of the family, and he spent more and more time away from home. The young husband could not even show up at night. To all of his wife's questions, he replied that he was not her slave and had the right to rest from the family. Gradually, the woman's rose. Colored glasses fell from her eyes. Sergio showed himself for what he was. That's why her mother-in-law assured her that he had the wind in his head. He turned out to be completely unprepared for family life and could not give up the usual entertainment. He was drawn to the care of a small child. At family gatherings, he was happy to carry his charmingly dressed daughter in his arms. His wife saw that her husband just admired himself and was proud of his role as a father, but on normal days he avoided all contact with the little girl. He preferred not to talk to his wife. It was hurtful and incomprehensible. Eventually, of course, she found out what it was all about. Anne overheard her husband's conversation for the first time one morning. The husband thought his wife was sleeping soundly after 3 hours of rocking Alice. The little girl was just not feeling well. The girl had been naughty the day before and would only take a nap in her mother's arms, and she could not sleep a wink from exhaustion. And of course, the girl heard everything, though her husband tried to speak softly. He was talking to some, judging by her voice, a young girl calling her his favorite and promising that they would soon have fun. Anne lay in bed and could hardly keep herself from bursting into the kitchen and making a scandal. But that would get her nowhere. Her husband had long ago become practically a stranger to her. They lived together, that was true. Her husband, importantly, fully provided for both her and her daughter. But what could she give her daughter if she left him now? So she had to pretend that nothing had happened. Since then, she often noticed signs of her husband's infidelity. Girls called him when he was home. The man hardly ever hid. No, of course he spoke more discreetly in the presence of his wife than when he thought she didn't hear anything. Sergio could come home in the morning explaining all the important meetings with a business partner. At the same time, he often wore a nightclub bracelet on his wrist, and Sergio's clothes openly smelled of women's perfume. And sometimes the man went on another business trip for 5 or 7 days. From there he returned invariably refreshed, rested, and sometimes even burnt, obviously under the southern sun. My wife endured it all. The woman felt humiliated, crushed, lost, and broken. She still loved him, after all, and until recently thought he had feelings for her. Well, yes, he had cooled off a little. It happens, especially after a baby comes into the family. For some men, it's like a test of strength, and it turns out he's having an affair on the side. Even, I guess, romances. After putting her tiny daughter to bed, she often cried, squeezed into a lump on the chair beside the baby's crib. The woman knew she was in a desperate position. Living with a husband who cheats on her left and right is unbearable. At the same time, Sergio had long looked at her, his lawful wife, as if she were nothing. And when was the last time they had a heart-to-heart talk? She could not recall the moment. She had to break up, or the woman would soon lose herself completely. But what next? Where would she go with a small daughter in her arms? Go back to a rented apartment. It's an option, of course, but she'll have to get a job. Alice is just a baby. She will probably get sick a lot in daycare, as all small children do. Who needs a worker like a young mother, constantly running on sick leave? It is unlikely she will be able to find work in this difficult period. Going back to the countryside is also a bad idea. After all, she had once worked hard to get out of there herself. Now to live again in a tiny house without normal conditions, and yet to condemn her daughter to such an existence? No, she had to think of something else. Her mother-in-law continued to visit her daughter-in-law and granddaughter often. Each time she gave the girl sumptuous gifts. A dress by a famous couturier, then tiny gold earrings, then an expensive doll, then some interesting game. It was obvious that the elderly woman did not dote on the girl. She, as the mother of the long-awaited princess, also got a lot of gifts and attention. A sensitive mother-in-law had long noticed that her daughter-in-law looked sad and thoughtful. Many times she asked her questions directly, but she always avoided answering. Tired, sleep-deprived, headache. No, she is a wonderful person. My daughter-in-law didn't doubt that at the time. Except how to tell about the humiliation she had to endure day after day. But one day the woman realized that she had to act. It happened on a rainy autumn. In the evening, the husband came home late and told his wife that he had a business dinner at a restaurant. Anne pretended to believe it, as she always did. But then she happened to see a picture of Sergio flipping through the feed on his phone. The woman only glanced at the screen and marveled. There was a photo. The woman glanced at the screen and was dumbfounded. There was a photo. He was posing with a beautiful blonde in his arms. She was smiling broadly into the lens and gently snuggling up to the man. It was a selfie. And then she couldn't take it anymore. "What is this?" The wife, without meaning to, immediately burst into a scream. The guy looked up at her completely calm eyes. "The picture is this." Indifference and calm finally brought the girl out of her mind. Long-held back emotions burst out along with sobs and insults. She called her husband the last words, shouted hurtful phrases right in his face. She wanted to hurt him more. She expected that the man would begin to justify himself, maybe even ask for forgiveness. But he looked at her with a mixture of pity and disgust and remained silent. The wife, suddenly completely out of control, gave Sergio a resounding slap. She put all her strength into the blow so that it came out quite sensitive. As if in slow motion, she watched as her husband's head tilted sharply back. He even had to clutch onto the table to keep from falling. She'd gotten what she wanted out of her husband's cold indifference. He glared at her with such malice that the woman grew cold with horror. With a sweeping stride, the man approached her and grabbed her firmly by the hair. Anne fully felt her husband's strong grip and realized that if he only wanted to, he could easily crush her with both hands. She could see that the man was barely holding back. She looked at her husband with rounded eyes, fearing for her own life, and she blamed her own life, and she blamed herself for the sudden breakdown. "Listen to me carefully," he hissed the husband. "I tell you once, I will not repeat it. If it happens one more time, you'll be out of this apartment like a cork out of a bottle. You'll stay as poor as you were before. You won't see any alimony because my salary is mostly unofficial. You'll get pennies. Do you understand?" My wife nodded silently. She was already starting to get a big shiver. The woman wanted only one thing at this moment, that all this would be over as soon as possible. But the man did not let go of her hair, but, on the contrary, continued to wind it on his fist. "You think I do not understand that you deliberately gave birth to a rich guy? You think you're the only one who's so sneaky. I didn't marry you because you're so sneaky. First of all, it used to be very good looking. Second, marriage to someone like you is supposed to be easy and unburdening. People like you should be happy with the conditions they're in, raising children and serving their husbands, not opening their mouths in vain. We all have our own advantages. You have wealth, riches, a quiet, secure life. I have my freedom. Does it really need to be explained? Don't you get it yourself?" Sergio pushed his wife away from him, and she backed out the door. The man's eyes were still ablaze with rage. Fortunately, he held it back and did not hit his wife. But obviously, he was very close to hitting her. She realized at that moment that the same scene would happen many more times. He would find something to cling to. He could hit, and he would do it sooner or later. After that, life went on. Her husband also disappeared for days and nights. He was no longer hiding and was talking to his girlfriends in front of his girlfriends in front of his wife. She was no longer resentful, but rather frightened. She realized that she could not live that long, and that such an existence was slowly destroying her. But there was no way out. Her husband was right. She has nowhere to go, nothing to live on. And then, in desperation, she made the biggest mistake of all. She turned to her husband's mother for help. The woman thought that her mother-in-law treated her well, and she was not expecting to hear her say such things, because she gave her gifts and was always friendly. "Well, that's not surprising," her mother shrugged. "He's been a naughty boy since he was young. I wouldn't have expected otherwise. No, I used to think he'd grow up, but I can see clearly now that he's an eternal child. What am I supposed to do?" She looked hopefully at her mother-in-law. Maybe she could tell me the way out. "Well, what now? Live your life as you live it. Your husband will provide for you and your daughter from head to toe. I guarantee it. Well, what can you do? It's the price of a good life. You won't even talk to him." Tears came to the girl's eyes. "I don't see the sense in it." Her mother shook her head. "I can't change my son. I will not be able to live with him. I will divorce." Stupid, my mother-in-law seemed to start worrying. "And how will you be alone? The alimony will be pennies. You'll have nowhere to live." "I'll go to my family to the country. I'd rather do that than go through all this. When Alice grows up, I'll think about moving back to town." "You mean I won't see her?" "I won't deprive her of contact with you," assured her daughter-in-law. "You will come to visit sometimes, or I will visit you, but I can't live with your son anymore. He is cruel, selfish. It destroys me. So I will see my granddaughter when you graciously allow it," my mother-in-law clarified. She seemed to let the words about her son pass her by. All she cared about was Alice. So long awaited, so beloved granddaughter, the object of her grandmother's pride and adoration. And so it turned out. I was her mother. So it's up to me to decide who my child will see and when. Wrong, baby. How nice of you to let me in on your plans. The child will be left to the father in the divorce. I'll take care of it. No, it was the woman's turn to be frightened. We usually leave the children with the mother. It's always like that. Yes. But that's if the mother can support the child. And you're going to deprive your daughter of normal living conditions. Take her to a remote village, to a house with no amenities, and you have no job. And my son has a large, comfortable apartment, and the salary he draws in the documents which it is necessary. So I'll judge the odds for myself. But I had dreamed all my life first of a daughter and then of a granddaughter. So many plans, so many hopes. And now I have her, and now I have her, and now you want to take her away. I don't think so. The girl still found the strength to leave her husband. Alice had just turned 3. It wasn't easy. Anne's parents and aunt were very supportive. Together they saved up money so their daughter and niece could rent an apartment in the city. A comfortable, clean, spacious apartment. One that would not raise any questions from the guardianship authorities, which of course her mother-in-law approached. Her relatives paid the rent for the apartment for 6 months. During this time, the girl got her daughter into kindergarten and found a job. Now she had good living conditions and enough salary to support the child. That is, the grandmother could not take the girl away, but the fight for her is still going on. The girl hoped that one of her mother-in-law's sons would have a girl, and she would turn her attention to her. But her ex-husband, who soon after the divorce married a young woman who looked like a fashion model, became the father of 2 sons. The wife of one of his brothers also gave birth to a boy. So Ali was the only granddaughter. That's why the former mother-in-law did not give up, and now and then she wrote complaints to the guardians. They were used to the fact that the police or guardianship officials often came to check on them. Naturally, they did not find any violations, but the girl lived in constant fear. Now Mama was hurrying home. Alice must have waited for her from work by now. She did indeed stay late, going into the mall for a minute, and ended up spending almost an hour there. So much new stuff, so many things to see. And the discounts everywhere were good. She hurried home, deftly maneuvering between the passers-by, of which there were many at this hour near the mall. Suddenly the woman's attention was attracted by an old woman, dry and hunched over, wearing an old coat with her head tied with a gray shawl. On her feet she wore stomped boots. The old woman's eyes were an amazing light blue color. As if not blinking, the old woman, looking around distractedly, turned to one person, then to another, but people neither heard nor saw her. Passers-by, without slowing down, hurried about their business, but the girl could not pass by and stopped. The grandmother seemed to realize that she finally had a listener. She looked into Anne's eyes and whispered in a low voice, "Daughter, help me, please. I'm in a desperate situation." Anne saw that this was indeed the case. Judging by the expression on her face, she was in a state close to panic. "What is it?" she asked, in the gentlest tone possible. "I'm here for the meat," the old woman explained. "You know, there's a good section in the basement, so I put my hand in my pocket and my wallet was gone. And only then I realized I forgot it at home. I did not take it. I left it on the nightstand, got distracted by the cat, and everything slipped my mind. I had money for a one-way ticket in my other pocket, so I got here without any problems. I don't know how to get home now." "So you need money for the bus?" she asked. "I do," she said, embarrassed. "It's embarrassing to ask like this, like a beggar. Well, what can I do? The drivers are mean now. They just won't take me anywhere. And I also have to go to the long-distance road. I live outside the city, in a village. I tried to ask the driver if he could give me a ride without money. He humiliated me in front of all the passengers so much that I was afraid to even ask the other one. And none of the passengers helped." The girl was genuinely surprised. "No," said the old woman sadly. "Luckily, there were not many people there either. The driver embarrassed me. That's all right. Sure, I'll help you." The girl readily reached into her purse. "Daughter, thank you very much. God bless you, such a good and not indifferent." The elderly woman almost cried from gratitude. "You give me your address or phone number. Better write, my son will transfer the money to you later." "No need," she smiled. "It's not hard for me to help. I also had help from kind people at a difficult time. So it's okay. Thank you, my good man." The girl nodded and went on her way. Anne spent a wonderful evening with her daughter. They ate ice cream and pizza and watched movies while cuddling on the couch. It was moments like this that made her feel I felt happy and protected. What warm and cozy evenings those were. The woman waited all week for Fridays just so she could relax and unwind in her daughter's company. Sometimes, very rarely on weekends, she would go with her friends or colleagues to a movie theater, bar, or nightclub. If her mother-in-law somehow found out about this outing, it was immediately followed by a mandatory visit from the child welfare authorities. How could the mother-in-law know so much about her former daughter-in-law, in-law's life? Was she watching her, or what? Her friends thought it was high time she found a man for herself. After her husband's betrayal, all men seemed to her to be liars. No, she did not want to meet someone, go on a date again and again, hope that she met the perfect man, and then bitterly disappointed. No, she didn't. And she had no time for romance, to be honest. Work, child, household chores, and problems were all on her delicate shoulders. No, not at all, thank you. Not that at all, thank you. Not that at all. Saturday mornings in the family always started late. Mother and daughter preferred to sleep in after a hard work week and rising early in the morning. But this time the sleepy silence of the apartment was broken by a sharp, piercing doorbell. She struggled to open her eyelids and glanced at her watch. It was early morning. She wondered who had bothered them so early on a Saturday. The neighbors probably. The woman reluctantly got out of bed, threw on her robe. A sleepy daughter was already coming out of the nursery. She looked so cute, so funny in her funny pajamas with bears. The bell, meanwhile, rang a second time. "Coming," shouted the woman, trying not to make her voice sound too angry. The woman looked through the peephole and at once excitement gripped her. There was a man standing on the landing. Tall, young, unfamiliar. It was not one of the neighbors as she first thought. "Who is it?" asked the woman. "My name is Anthony." The man at the door introduced himself. "I have some questions for you." "Are you from the police or maybe from child welfare?" She was used to visits from officials, but usually they introduced themselves by their patronymic and added their ranks, but not here. "I'm not the police. You see, I'm the son of that old lady you gave the money for the ticket yesterday." "Oh, here's the thing. The old woman did send her son to give her the money. But how does this man know her address? She didn't give it to that grandmother yesterday. Strange and very suspicious. I understand that you are afraid to open to me." The man's voice came through the door again. "And rightly so. Nowadays you have to be vigilant. Let's do this. I will go out and wait for you on the porch, okay? We'll talk there." "All right," she agreed. Indeed, it was the most sensible thing to do. At the same time, the stranger's morning visit still seemed strange and suspicious. First of all, she was concerned with the question of how this man had found her. The woman looked out the window. The guy was indeed standing near the entryway, waiting for her. It was a little frightening to leave the apartment. What if this man was some kind of criminal and his accomplice remained on the floor? But there was no one at the door. He went downstairs. Her guest met her on the porch. "You see, I have such a delicate question," the man began. The girl immediately became tense. Something told her that the conversation would not be pleasant. "What is it?" "My mother. She's already very old. Age. There's something wrong with her head. She's not incapacitated, of course. But my mother is like a child, you know." Anne nodded. Of course. She knew that with age, many people slip into childhood. And even though the old lady from yesterday didn't give that impression, if her son says so, then that's the way it is. But what does she have to do with it? Yesterday, her mother was in a desperate situation. Left without money, far from home. She must have been desperate, so she offered you her thing in exchange for a bus ticket. What thing? The girl was sincerely surprised. The old lady did not offer her anything. The only thing she asked for a phone number to transfer the money. What do you mean, what things? The man looked at Anne attentively. There was something hostile in his whole appearance. She didn't give me anything. I mean, nothing at all. She just asked for money, and I gave it to her, and that was it. That's all. You're lying to me now. There are witnesses who saw and heard everything. In fact, that's how I found you. A friend of mine works nearby. He saw the whole scene, and then he noticed which entrance you went into. It wasn't hard to find you there. He simply asked the neighbors what apartment you lived in, and described your appearance according to his friend. I do not understand anything. She shook her head. Nothing yet. Mom gave you the jewelry voluntarily. You didn't extort it. There are witnesses. But now that you're lying, it doesn't look good. You took advantage of the old lady's insanity and took possession of a valuable item. What valuable thing? Anne exclaimed. Explain to me. I can't understand anything. And you seem to be a brilliant actress. The boy curved his lips contemptuously. I confess, I hope that all this is some kind of misunderstanding. As a matter of fact, it's our family jewel. Not only is it worth a pretty penny on its own, but it's an antique too, you know. It's worth a fortune. And you think I have it? Well, who else has it? You gave an old lady money for the bus yesterday? I did. Well, she offered you her brooch in return. Maybe you only took it because you didn't realize how valuable it was. It was like the guy was giving her one last chance to get out of the situation with dignity. I didn't see any brooch. It was some kind of misunderstanding. Mom said she gave it to the girl who paid her fare. That's you, so you have the brooch. No, I don't. Well, how can you prove it? Just give me the jewelry, that's all. I have witnesses, and my mother will confirm in court if necessary that you took the jewelry from her. The girl felt cold, clammy goosebumps crawling up her back. This man, is he really going to sue her? That's absurd. But he has witnesses. Otherwise, how would he have found her so quickly? What if she can't prove anything in court? What if she's accused of extortion? After all, no one is immune to miscarriages of justice. How many times is that? She clutched her head. She couldn't become a defendant or even a suspect right now, no way. Her mother-in-law was aware of her every move. She would surely will immediately know about the whole story, and of course will use it to his advantage. The mother's problems with the law are already a good argument for the guardianship authorities. Her daughter could be taken away from her. This should not be allowed to happen. If you have already taken the brooch somewhere, said the man again in his soft, beautiful voice, you must have known that they would look for it, so you sold it as soon as possible. Then at least give me the money back. It's worth about. And the man read out a figure that made the girl feel dizzy. She couldn't raise that kind of money in a few years, and they probably won't give her a loan. The last one was still outstanding, and her salary wouldn't allow it. Unless somewhere with a high interest rate. How to live then? With what? The situation looked hopeless. The court case should not be allowed, because in this case, the mother-in-law would finally get a chance to get custody of her granddaughter. But there's no way to get the money either. You're wrong. She tried again to get through to Anthony. I didn't take the brooch, and I don't have the money. Fine. Then we'll go to court. The jewelry was insured. If they prove you were at fault, which I personally have no doubt, at least we'll be compensated. You, on the other hand, will be in big trouble. Wait a minute, she exclaimed. Give me a little time to think. It's just that this trouble has come upon me so suddenly. I don't even know what to do. Just give me the jewelry back or give me my money back. She shook her head. She wanted to scream in the nasty man's face that she hadn't taken anything. But maybe she shouldn't piss him off because her fate depended on it now. I need some time. All right, the man nodded, but don't think for long. Now we'll exchange phone numbers, and I'll call the day after tomorrow. I hope you'll have found the money by now, or decided to give me the brooch, because otherwise we'll have a different conversation, and probably in court. He turned abruptly and walked toward the parking lot. Anne stared after him for a long time. Mom, what happened? The daughter looked at her mother with fright. You look so pale. Just an old acquaintance. It's all right, she smiled weakly. Shall we make pancakes? Remember, you promised to teach me? Of course I did. Her daughter talked about school and her sections and friends, and the woman nodded and smiled where necessary, wondered where necessary, and praised her daughter. But her thoughts were far away. She was thinking about how she was going to get out of this strange situation. The boy wouldn't let go. That was obvious. He got it into his head that she had appropriated an expensive brooch. Nothing will convince him. That old lady, why did she say that about her? Maybe the grandmother is really out of her mind and doesn't know what she's saying. Or maybe the old woman, having lost the brooch, had invented a legend for her son not to swear at her. Judging by the way her relative behaved, he knows how to be tough, even cruel. Either way, She has to decide something now. There was no way she could become a suspect now. It remains to be seen whether she can prove her innocence. That leaves the only option, to find the money. But where? There's no one to help her. Her parents themselves live in poverty. Her salary, of course, not bad. But the debt suddenly dumped on her would still not cover even a few years, and the loan is unlikely to give. There was only one way out. To turn to her ex-husband. The main thing was not to let the man talk about her mother. He was so quick to figure out how to turn the situation to his advantage. She'd been dreaming of taking away Alice, and Sergio doesn't want a daughter. That's for sure. He won't fight for her. You'll have to get over your pride and call your ex-husband. How hard it is. How unbearably hard. But what to do? Her husband has never been involved in her daughter's life, unless you count the paltry elements that fell on the card every month. The girl sent her daughter off to watch cartoons and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. Sergio answered right away. "Hi, we need to talk." "Something with Alice?" the man asked in a rather indifferent tone. "No, but it's about her too. Something has happened to me." They met that night at the cafe. He had once asked a girl here on a date. Years ago, this place sold wonderful strawberries and eclairs. Now, however, they weren't on the menu. "So, what's up with you?" He made it seem like he didn't have much time. It had been 5 years since their divorce. Sergio hadn't changed much in that time. He still looked like a well-to-do guy from a youth show, a stylish nightclub regular. She briefly told her ex-husband what had happened to her. A sneer appeared in Sergio's eyes. "Yes, that could only happen to you. It's a typical crook, after all. You have to scare him into filing a police report. He's going to report me himself." She sighed. "I can't show my face there. You know, your mother, she's just waiting for the right moment to take her daughter." Mother. He sighed sadly. "That's true. I'm sick of it too. Always itching for me to sue for my daughter. Why would I want to do that? And the child is always better off with her mother." She nodded and then asked the question again. "So, will you help me? Lend me money without interest? I will pay back slowly, with each paycheck." "No," answered Sergio. "I'm not going to sponsor criminals. He will ask for more later. These are the kind of people you can't bribe him." Anne sighed. She had already realized that you won't get any help, and that it was a mistake to go to him anyway. "When he called you, tell him that the report is already at the station." The ex-husband had one last word of advice. Then he paid the bill and walked out of the cafe. And she was left alone. Yes, she knew that he was probably a crook. And if he wasn't, there was no way she could risk it. Living under the scrutiny of her former mother-in-law was difficult. She increasingly frightened the former daughter-in-law with her insistence and desire to take her granddaughter. If she found out about the lawsuit now, she would use all her connections to make her long-held dream come true. No, she would not give her that chance. What was to be done? The woman decided to walk home. The road is not too close, but the weather is wonderful. It's springtime. The sun is shining. The birds are singing. The sky is clear and blue, not a cloud. The snow is literally melting before her eyes. She used to always experience a kind of mental uplift at such moments. Nature was waking up, and summer, her favorite time of the year, was just around the corner. But today it was hard on her soul. She was suddenly faced with a completely overwhelming problem. How to solve it? Looking for money or trying to prove she had nothing to do with it. Both options didn't seem particularly workable. Anne wandered apart from the very mall where she had met the old woman. They should have run into each other that night. If she had been walking home later or before, none of this would have happened. She would have lived quietly, happy about the coming spring, the sunshine, and the upcoming vacation. Suddenly, the woman stopped as if struck by a thunderbolt. She even blinked her eyes a few times to make sure she hadn't imagined it. The same old woman was walking across the parking lot. Next to her, gently supporting her by the elbow to prevent her from slipping in the snow, was a young man. And it was not her new acquaintance. A short, blonde-haired man with a pleasant, open face and the same eyes as the old woman's. He smiled and said something to the older woman. The woman listened attentively, and from time to time inserted her own remarks. The couple walked away. They would probably soon get into the man's car and drive away. No, such a thing must not be allowed to happen. Fate itself had given her a unique chance to get out of a difficult situation. Now she would talk to the old woman, and perhaps everything would become clearer. She followed the man and the old woman across the parking lot. Perhaps they were in cahoots with the man. Now an unpleasant conversation awaited her again. But it was worth a try, wasn't it? "Wait a minute," shouted Anne to the old woman and the man as they were about to disappear around the corner. The older woman was the first to turn around. She gazed at the girl for a moment, squinting her eyes myopically, before suddenly a smile lit up the old woman's face. Apparently, she recognized the passerby who had given her money for a fare a couple of days ago. The man saw her for the first time, so he looked questioningly at the stranger rushing toward them. "Hello," Anne exhaled as she approached the couple. "How do you do?" The man said hello. "Hello, my daughter." Granny smiled warmly. "I recognized you, didn't I? It was you who helped me the other day. Thank you very much." The man finally realized what it was all about, and smiled too. "So it was you who did not pass by my mother? She told me how desperate she was. People ran past her and didn't pay any attention to her. You were the only one who responded. Are you her son too?" The girl clarified. "What do you mean also?" The old woman was surprised. "Vitya is my only son, late, long awaited. I had all my daughters before him, 4 daughters, all much older than my son. The older ones are already grandmothers themselves." "What about Anthony?" Anne stared at her mother and son. "Who?" The old woman frowned. "I don't seem to know anyone like that. Did something happen to you?" Victor finally guessed. "And it has something to do with the time you met my mother, right?" Anne nodded silently. She understood nothing at all yet. One thing was clear. The guy threatening her was a crook after all. And now she knew it for sure. But there were many questions, and the main one, how to act now. Anthony was a crook. Anne was on his radar. Who knows how he would behave? What if he started to threaten or generally do something to her, or, God forbid, with her daughter? How scary. "Tell us what happened," Victor asked softly. "But that is not your problem. Why do you need unnecessary worries? Just please leave your phone number because we may need it soon." Tell me. Victor lightly stroked her on the shoulder. This friendly gesture made a difference. The woman suddenly realized that she wanted to share her story with this man. "I should probably introduce myself first," she sighed. "My name is Anne. I was on my way back from work that evening and I came out of the mall and saw an old woman. She was talking to people about something, but everyone was rushing about their business. And she told them everything. And how she had given the old woman money for her fare, and about the morning call and the conversation with the crook. She also mentioned her own doubts and worries. I had to devote the audience in the details of her personal life. How else would they have understood why she did not immediately go to the police? The man listened without interrupting. His mother occasionally shook her head, clucked her tongue and sighed, occasionally inserting angry, judgmental remarks. Now and then she rolled over the crook, now and then over her mother-in-law. The husband suffered as well, for he had not helped the mother of his child in a difficult moment. She could see that they sincerely wanted to cheer her up, to give her confidence that everything will be all right. This concern even brought tears to her eyes, but she quickly blinked them back. Now is not the time to relax. We'll get this scoundrel out, Victor said at last. His words were so convincing that she felt with every fiber of her being that she was no longer alone, but protected. It turned out that the woman's son had connections in the police, and now the girl was not afraid to go there. Thank you for your concern. Why not help a good man? The man smiled. That smile warmed the girl's soul. You didn't go by my mother when she needed help either. And you got into this awful situation only because of us. On the way home, she went over and over the details of this conversation in her head. The man called a couple of hours later. She had not counted on such promptness. At first, she shuddered at the sharp trill of the cell phone. Fear gripped her heart with a cold, clammy hand. He would start threatening again, accusing, frightening. The department put her phone on a wiretap to collect data on the crook and took her statement, promising that they would take the guy into custody. When it was over, Victor offered the woman a ride home. She gladly agreed, not because she didn't want to walk to the bus stop, but out of a desire to spend time with this man. And wondered to herself, she only knew him a little, but next to him she felt so calm, so peaceful, that she did not want to part with this man. He had promised her that he would see it through to the end, and so it would be. That evening, the scammer called the woman again. On the advice of the investigator, the woman asked for a reprieve. That I didn't take any brooch, you still wouldn't believe me. She only asked this question so that the swindler would confirm his claim aloud. There was no brooch, but the man stubbornly insisted that she had tricked the old man and snatched the jewel from her. Aren't you tired of pretending? Please. You took it from your mother by taking advantage of her helpless state, and now you're going to get on my nerves. I'm calling the police. No. She pretended to be frightened. I can't be under suspicion now. The situation is such that it's easier to give the money away. I've already started processing the loan, but the procedure is not fast. You'll have to wait. How long? About 2 days. Okay, I'll call again. She exhaled with relief. She had succeeded, had managed to squeeze out the couple of days the investigators had asked for. The rest of the evening passed as usual. She helped her daughter with another project. They cooked dinner together, played a little game of Monopoly. The girl tried not to think about Victor, but she couldn't help herself. Again and again she remembered his pale blue eyes and wide smile. A day later, she received a phone call from a new acquaintance. The man suggested meeting in a cafe near the building where she worked. Just in case, the woman warned her bosses that she might be late from her lunch break and hurried to the cafe. Victor was already waiting for her at a table. He looked calm and happy. She could tell from his expression that everything was all right. She involuntarily admired Victor. High cheekbones, confident, calm gaze. The man told her that the crook had been apprehended. It turned out that he was a former pupil of an orphanage who from a hard life decided to practice fraud. Anthony himself was sometimes surprised by the size of the transfers, but over time it became increasingly difficult to work, too risky. It was hard not to leave a trail. He was called to work for companies that dealt professionally with such phone calls. There, the risk of getting caught was almost minimal, but he dreamed of a solo career. The guy was as imaginative as he was attentive. He liked to think up new schemes, to make up unbelievable stories. This apparently was how Anthony's creativity manifested itself. With Anne in general, it was interesting. He once happened to see her in court. Once again, she got there from her former mother-in-law. The woman then easily proved that she was quite capable of raising her own daughter, but the scammer immediately realized that she clearly did not want to become a heroine of a detective story, to get into the hands of the police. This means that she is an excellent potential victim, and not only will she not report him, she can also be intimidated. That's where the guy hit the bullseye. He knew how to draw a conclusion, so the girl became a potential victim. Now he watched her from time to time, waiting for the right moment, but the opportunity never presented itself. And then one day, quite by chance, the boy noticed how she helped an unfamiliar old woman. The story took shape somehow by itself. The perpetrator was waiting for years in prison because, as it turned out, dozens of people had been hurt by him. Anne still couldn't believe that the problem that had so poisoned her life these past few days no longer existed. It was great that everything was so well and successfully resolved. The only thing was, what was next? It turns out that now she and Victor have nothing more in common. He would be out of the cafe now, and that was it. The conversation had sort of come to a logical conclusion. All she had to do was thank him again for his help. The man sighed deeply. I don't want you to think I'm taking advantage of being a savior or anything. But if I asked you to go to the movies tonight, what would you say? She felt a pleasant warmth building up in her chest. What would she say? She'd have to try harder than she could to keep herself from screaming with joy right now. Apparently her emotions were well read on her face because Victor understood and smiled.